and well, I'm Nick. I'm from Halo. I'm the creative partner and one of the founders of the studio. And you wouldn't be wrong to think I've never fucking heard of you. However, we are a top 100 UK brand agency. Thank you, Design Week, for that. We shape brands that grab attention and capture imaginations. We work for an array of clients, both household names and challenger brands. I suppose if we're not famous, obviously we just agreed that I'm not famous. Some of the work that we do is, however, so we've been the global digital agency for Live Nation and Ticketmaster for the last 10 years. We do things like Wireless Festival and Download Festival and various artist tours. We do a lot of work in FMCG, food and drink. Most recently, we did the global rebrand for Church & Dwight's dry hair shampoo brand, Batiste, which now sells 2 cans a second around the world. We do a lot of work with people like Tesco's and M&S, specifically in food. And we've done a lot of work in professional services. So we work for brands like St. James's Place, which are a huge investment bank, and then people like AXA. Alongside the likes of Bacardi, etc. So it's a big array of work, but we also love working on challenger brands. Oops, let's see if that'll go. Okay, so let's talk about behind the brand. So this particular one is about Flair. So I'm going to get into what Flair actually do. But this was a brand that we launched in the summer of last year. Now, they're a tech brand. They specifically work in the racial equity space. I've made a meme as way of an apology before we start. I'm not the greatest at making talks, but I have rehearsed this and I will try very hard to make it interesting. So let's kick off. And I'm going to kick off with this. So graphic design, I could have done that. Yeah, but you didn't. And it's actually, I mean, I've taken that as a famous quote about modern art, but it's so true in this case. Interestingly, when a studio does significant work for a piece of significant work, you're always wondering what's going to happen. This was a particular significant project for us, really interesting challenger brand working in a really interesting space, and it did garner quite a bit of attention. We were really glad when Brand New featured this. And actually the Brand New review of the work was extremely favorable and we were delighted, but the action can be found in the comments. Here's some of the comments that we had. So, you know, thank you, Timothy. Wow, that's some bad letter spacing. Timothy then goes on to talk about the visual language has potential, but we fucked it. And he has some other comments to make where he's missed some of the jokes that we put in there. Stoneheart actually felt it was important to not only take our logo, but draw lines on it and talk about where we'd gone wrong. Austin there, they are in for a rude awakening the first time they try to print something. It's all right, Austin. We do know what we're doing and we have heard of Pantones before, but thanks for the comment. Jeff at the top there, Jeff Halmos, the kerning is also junior, which is pretty harsh. We had quite a lot of that, actually. A lot of people love to wade in on kerning. My favourite one here was Andrew Reifman. My brain keeps wanting to read it as Flair. I think that's on you, Andrew, to be honest. I really do think that's on you. But nonetheless, you know, we had quite a lot of opinion poured in about it. Great one from Kevin Handy. That hoodie is great. You fucking legend, Kevin. Thank you for that. I like to think of it this way. In its simplest terms, we took Flair from looking shit to looking awesome. But actually, that's even unfair of me to say. Flair, actually, the nucleus of the actual technology itself, they originally wanted to use it as a way to help local community football clubs work together and arrange fixtures. That's actually at the very sort of the very beginning of that technology that they now use to push racial equity and really push the issue of racial equity and solve racial equity in large organizations. But it started as a football brand. So there's nothing wrong with that logo. It's just entirely wrong for where they wanted to take the brand. So going to talk about the design process, and well, let's get it. I'll start off with this. I fucking hate talking about the design process. And the reason for that is this. Designers talk about their process all the time, and we do. There is no right or wrong way to approach designing a brand. It's whatever actually works for you. And what I tend to find is when we go to design talks, everyone ends up rolling out the same platitudes, the same tropes, because it's really hard to just go, look, do whatever it is that you do which works for you. And you end up with lots of people going, look, make time to play, interrogate the brief, go to a museum, probably say something about fearlessness in there. But fundamentally, it's all waffle. My design process looks like this. And this is going to show you two things. One, it's showing you that there's a lot of turmoil involved in creating anything. And you go through all of the sort of slings and arrows of outrageous fortune on the journey from delivering the actual final piece of work that you're pleased with. The other point about this slide is that I'm showing you that word clouds are still a thing. The most important part of our process as a design studio is strategy. And I'm going to talk to you about the way that we build strategy and why that's so pivotal to the work that we then produce. And I'm going to hopefully show you how strategy informs that creative expression. What I'm also going to try to do is give you some of the tools that we use to define a strategy around a brand. So I say this to clients all the time, and I do say this for dramatic effect. So design is the last thing we do. But inherently, it is actually true. Design is the last thing that we do. And the reason is this. You can, of course, design a brand without strategy. But I think it is also true to say that if you design a brand without strategy, you will be doing it every year. Because without strategy, it is just this sort of nebulous idea of what design is. Everything that you do, everything that we do, is about commercial creativity. So without clear strategic intent, measurable objectives, commercial positioning, brand proposition, all of that good stuff, it is just going to be graphic design. And the problem with graphic design inherently is that it's subjective. Strategy provides objectivity to the creative process. Strategy gives you acuity. I mean, my team will just be bored if they're watching, because I say this all the time. But what strategy inherently is trying to do is give you acuity of vision about what you're trying to achieve commercially for the brand that you're working with. So strategy is the building blocks of whatever you do next. So what makes a brand strategy? Okay, so you have to start with context. So that's the commercial landscape in which the brand exists. It's the effects of micro and macro forces. It's also about where the competitive set plays and how they work. Then you're looking at brand positioning itself. So where do we as a brand play and how do we win there? And what makes us distinctive in that space? And actually, just as an aside, you may or may not have heard of the Harvard Business School used to promote an idea called the Red Sea, Blue Sea strategy. Now, Red Sea or Blue Sea simply means if you're playing in a space in the Red Sea, that means there's loads of competition and it's going to be really noisy, difficult marketplace. So you're always looking for Blue Sea, you're looking for clear space. Now, inherently, that sounds like a really good idea. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But you can also argue that if no one's playing in that space, there's probably a good reason for it. And actually, what you're trying to really do is not be completely alone. What you're looking for is competitive set that you align with, that actually, when people are considering the product or the service that you offer, they're thinking of all of these good companies, and you want to be included in that consideration. And so actually, the simple way to look at it is, if you want to stand out from a crowd, you still have to be part of a crowd. You just have to pick that crowd wisely. And that leads us to the brand proposition. Brand proposition is the value that we're going to have and we're going to offer to our audience, and why that proposition, why that value should matter to them. And then finally, within a brand strategy, you're trying to create the brand narrative. So that's the story of our brand. That's how we tell it. It's how we drive personality. It's how we create hierarchical messaging, which has value to our audience and actually explains our brand in a simple and concise and meaningful way. We are trying to create a story around the brand which has meaning to our audience. If you do all of this right, you'll end up with, in this case, a sexy brand book, which tells this entire story in a really exciting and beautiful way. I'm only putting this in because I'm not going to get to the design bit for a few more slides, and I wanted to keep everyone's interest. There is a really, really nice brand book which goes with Flair, but let's get into how we do it. So I think this is really interesting because actually when we came to this, unsurprisingly, I've not really had a great deal of issues with racial equity in my life. So it takes a lot for a design studio like us to take on a project like this, because we really learn a ton about the way society works and actually how privileged we really are. And I'm really kind of, actually at this point, I should say, interestingly, our privilege and our insight into the way that large organizations work and the way that people of color really experience this racial inequity was hugely powerful, but our outsider status on this was really useful. So let's look at the brand context. What do Flair actually do? So I'm just going to read this. So using digital survey technology and advanced data analytics, Flair helped businesses to track in detail the lived experiences of staff in regards to racial equity. And in response to those results, they offer practical ways to address the governance and culture that creates racial inequality and inequity. So fundamentally, when you put Flair inside your business, it creates regular survey or regular contact, digital surveys which are contacting staff. Staff then talk about really openly and anonymously, importantly, about these lived experiences. Then all of those data results go into the Flair system. And what it starts to look at is it looks at what the major priorities are for your workforce. And then it starts to look at the ways that the business can address them and address them in a timely manner. So not just coming up with answers which you might be able to solve in 10 years' time. Flair is all about looking at actionable policy that you can put in place and make changes quickly and really start to change the game over a shorter time frame. So this is important because it's a unique offer, okay? No one is directly addressing racial equity in corporations. Flair's engagement platform and advanced analytics capability is genuinely unique. So I say this here, it's genuinely unique. I should also say, I never believe that anything can be deemed unique. Normally, I would always talk about there are no unique selling points because they can always be copied or people can roughly have a very similar offer, but you can have a meaningful selling point. But in the case of Flair, no one else is doing it. They actually do stand alone as a unique proposition. The problem is no one is looking for a racial equity solution. And you just need to go online to look at the most used search terms. And actually you'll find that racial equity is very low down. No one is searching for a racial equity solution. That's the problem. And the reason why is that everyone's actually searching for a D, E, and I solution. And I think when you start talking about D, E, and I, it's quite interesting to sort of get back to the heart of it. And you think of it, or one might think of it as quite a modern idea, right? And it's not. Flair are actually really late to the party on this. The diversity, ethnicity, and inclusion debate has been driven by global management consultancies such as McKinsey or BCG or Deloitte or Accenture. They've been doing it for years. And this really surprised me when we were starting to work on this project. When I say they've been shaping it for years, I mean years. This is from McKinsey in 2015. Now, the bit that I've highlighted in yellow there, they say they should ensure that a robust, and this is talking about large organizations, that a robust I&D, so that's the inclusion and diversity business case designed for individual companies is well accepted and think seriously about which forms of multivariant diversity to prioritize, for example, going beyond gender and ethnicity. That's a lot of management waffle. What they mean is strong organizations flourish and compete better when they are more diverse, and that its businesses need to be as diverse as possible, and they should be striving to really push through this diversity and inclusion and really making sure that their business is representative of the whole of society. That's what they're basically saying. And then they're also saying in blue, they need to set the right data-driven targets for the representation of diverse talent. And what they mean there is you need to be able to prove that that you're doing this. You need to find ways that you can measure what you're doing so that actually this is not nebulous, that you've actually got some real direction in place. Now, they were saying this in 2015. And because they're so fucking big, and the rest of them, the BCGs, the Bains, the Deloittes, etc., they're all jumped on that bandwagon and started talking about it in this way. They're the ones who start to control the conversation about DE&I. And they're the ones who really brought this term DE&I into the consciousness of large organizations. So I quickly moved to Heidrick Struggles in 2022. Heidrick Struggles are really, they're an executive search business. They're absolutely enormous. They also do a ton of work in management consultancy, specifically because they're executive search and recruitment. They're working with large parts of HR. So they're working with HR in large organizations and very large HR consultancies, right? And they said 96% of CEOs consider DE&I to be a strategic priority. That's based on some research that they did alongside Fortune and Deloitte. So they've got all of the management consultancies and the executive search are now all working together to shape this conversation. They then said 81.6% of all CEOs had already agreed to undertake their DE&I related initiatives within 1 year, right? So what you're learning is from 2015, where DE&I really comes into sort of consciousness in terms of the parlance of large organizations and HR and what they're talking about. And then it's been driven even further forward by 2022, where it's now this priority of CEOs and the C-suite to really start creating action on DE&I in their organizations. Okay, this sounds boring, but it is important. It's important because Flair have a product which actually, although it is primarily and only interested in racial equity, that means that they have a product that makes DE&I more than just a nebulous HR initiative. And when I say a nebulous HR initiative, what I mean is, if you have a DE&I strategy in your large organization, there will be multiple strands covering multiple issues, not just about ethnicity, not just about gender. It could be also about disability, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on. And the problem is, those multiple strands are often very difficult to measure how effective you are being. Actually, a lot of the time, just being able to say that we have a strategy in place or we are working towards these ideas is enough. But that doesn't create change. Actually, Flair have a product which can actually create and energize and power that change in the role of racial equity, which is a tenet of a DE&I initiative. So let's look at the brand positioning that we did. And the next slide, just so you all know, the irony is not lost on me, but it's important to look at it. So brand positioning. The world is dominated by old white men, but we do need to reach them. And I think it's this, if you want to change society, you need to be working with the large organizations with large workforces. That's incredibly important. And unfortunately, they're still dominated by old white men. That is the way it works. So actually, our audience is a bunch of old white guys. So we need to get the C-suite's attention. We have to frame the Flair proposition as a DE&I solution. And this is a sort of a difficult moment for them because they've built their entire brand on saying this is about racial equity and trying to argue that a DE&I initiative is too nebulous and that actually concentrating on racial equity is the way forward. The problem is no one is talking about racial equity. So what we really need to do is position Flair as a DE&I solution, and we need to start using that language. We need to say that we're a DE&I solution which is offering actionable and measurable results in racial equity, which, as I said, is one of the key tenets of any DE&I strategy. Actionable and measurable is important because it offers clarity, it offers direction, and it offers visibility. So why does that matter? Well, we'll get into how we shape it. But when we're doing any brand positioning work, the key about any brand positioning work is absolute distillation of an idea. And you can have tons of information, you can have tons of competitive set reviews, etc. You can have all of this sort of wall of information, but fundamentally, you've got to get it down to simple ideas that you can then start to translate creatively. So we use this. This is a brand positioning quadrant that we use a lot. So at the very top, we look at the problem. What's the problem? Businesses struggle to make DE and I initiatives structured, measurable, and ultimately, therefore, effective. The audience motivation. Well, the C-suite is under pressure from staff, customers, shareholders, and society as a whole to make DE&I successful. There is an expectation, there is a mood shift over the last 5 or so years, I mean, over the last 10 years, but really becoming more acute over the last 5 years, where there is an expectation that businesses will do this and that they will do it successfully. So what's our advantage? As we've said, we have advanced data analytics and we help businesses to identify and solve racial equity issues as part of their DE&I strategies. So we've got something which really makes that workable. And we're fighting against this whole idea of DE&I as this nebulous HR initiative with vague outcomes and no clear measurable results. We're trying to change that. We're trying to make DE&I effective. And so our brand position for Flair is that we are a specialist DE&I technology solution. So we are addressing racial equity as a primary requirement with defined action measurable results. But what we're doing is putting the brand in the DE&I space because that is what the audience is looking for. Once we're through the door, then we can really talk about the power of racial equity and being able to affect racial equity within the business and make it a positive outcome using this sort of structure of technology and data to help us do it. In other words, racial equity for our audience, for the C-suite, is often not a relatable problem to them. But DE&I in their businesses is absolutely their problem to solve. So we have to help them understand racial equity within their organization, and we have to give them the tools to create positive change. And the reason we need to do that is because they need to prove to staff, they need to prove to customers, they need to prove to shareholders that they are effective and are taking action. And why do they do this? They do this because they're under pressure to do it. They know they need to do it. They may not relate to the problem, but they know it affects them. And this makes them look good. And this is a sort of an inconvenient truth, but it makes them look good. So that's important. But if it may be making them look good and it's not altruistic, but also it is good for their business. McKinsey has been right since 2015 about saying that organizations which are diverse and embrace diversity are far more successful. And there is a shit ton of data which proves this to be true. So we know that doing this is good for business. And fundamentally, if you can do this in lots and lots of really large organizations, that bleeds through into society and fundamentally will help change society for the better. So it's good. But we had to ask Flair a really simple question. We asked them, do you want to change society or be known as the people who change society? Because there is a difference. Let me explain. I think it's wrong to try to win an argument about the importance of racial equity. In fairness, that discussion, that argument, that debate has been raging for years. And everyone agrees or primarily everyone on the surface would agree that racial equity is incredibly important. And everyone knows that this has got to be done, right? But we're making it a priority by making it easier to affect change. So we're saying to the C-suite, you know the importance of racial equity, or you know the importance of racial equity as part of a DE&I solution, and we are going to make it easier for you to affect positive change, which is going to be positive for you and your business. Because we're a tech solution, that means we can work directly with businesses. So you can come to us directly and you can plug us into your system and we can work directly for you. Or we can be sold as a solution by HR and management consultants. So in other words, we have a really great opportunity, because if we don't need to be known as the business which really helped shape society for the better, if we just want to do it, we don't actually have any competition. We don't have to fight with anyone. We actually only have partners in shaping real progress in DE&I. That's it. So when we look at something like, let's look at Accenture as a really good example. Accenture work in this space. Accenture are hired by businesses to help them with their DE&I initiatives. And we previously would have said, right, it's not about DE&I, this is nebulous, actually start with racial equity and you can make a real change. But Accenture have that conversation. They're leading that conversation along the sites of Heidrick Struggles or McKinsey, right? So they're leading this conversation. And we saw them as competition. Our strategy says they're not competition, they're partners. And if you remove the ego, and it's that the inconvenient truth is feeling really passionate that you can change the world. If you don't want to be known as that person, if you just want to make it happen, Accenture are no longer an enemy. They're actually a partner. And if you look at it this way, this is actually part of the actual sort of strategy that we gave them, which is about how to shape the business. And we said this: to grow and scale quickly, you can still work directly with small to medium large businesses. That's a business which will have 150 plus employees. So you'll still be working with large businesses and you can directly work with them. And they'll inherently have a fairly small HR department. They'll know they have a DE&I strategy. They'll find it difficult to implement it. Actually, you're perfect here. You can go straight in, plug it into the system and really help them directly one-on-one. But you can also partner with smaller consultancies. So you can create a partnership program where you work with anyone who is working with board level clients working on their people strategies. You can be part of that. You don't have to be competing with them. You can literally offer your product to them as a service that they can supply to their own clients. You can then potentially have this partnership program in place where you kind of share your technology, their experience and implementation, and you can kind of create cross-pollination and work together to make it happen. The big one is, why not license the Flair product to the likes of Accenture and McKinsey and BCG and Bain and Heidrick Struggles and Korn Ferry, because they're the people who are being paid millions of dollars to work with the biggest organizations all over the world, and they are working on DE&I. So why don't we go directly to them, say that we're not enemies, we're not in competition, we're in partnership, even if it means you white labeling our product, do it. Because if you can change large organizations and you've got the ability to do so, and you can use our product to do it, that will have a direct benefit to the rest of society going forward. And so as soon as you remove the idea of being famous for actually making change happen, and you suddenly become comfortable with just making change happen, then you feel more comfortable about white labeling or partnering with the likes of Accenture. Which then leads us into this brand proposition and narrative piece. So I'm going to show you this. This is a brand canvas. So we use lots of models, and I will say up front, models are only as good as what you put into them. A model cannot tell you anything. Shit in, shit out is the answer. But this is our brand canvas, and it helps us shape our thinking. At the bottom, we've got context. So we want all of those inputs. We want to understand the forces which are acting on and shaping the brand. We're looking for those external market forces, key competitors. We're looking for those business objectives, everything, all of the sort of nuts and bolts, which is going to give us the information, which will give us a really good understanding of the context in which the brand exists. Then we're looking at target audience. Now, we don't necessarily just think of a target audience, because on launch, we're looking for brand evangelists, people who are really going to passionately believe in what we do and are going to share that, going to talk about that, going to actually start to help us promote the brand. So what's our value proposition to them? What's our valuable offering to them? How do we offer something which has real value and meaning to them? And then actually that's an overall idea. Then you might look at their needs, their wants, needs and fears. How are we actually addressing individual concerns? How are we addressing individual issues? How do we offer direct solutions to those? And that kind of is your sort of the functional elements of a brand to a certain extent. Then you look at guiding principles. I know that a lot of people talk about brand values, and I fucking hate brand values, because the idea of a value is that your values change over time. It's that classic idea of when you're in your youth, you might vote Labour, and then as you get older and you start worrying about your pension, you start voting Conservative. That type of classic idea that values can change. We would say that guiding principles are really important because they are the fabric, the truths that will never change, that fundamentally at the heart of that business. And they shouldn't just be one words like innovation or trust or whatever. They should actually be a guide, not just to what the brand is going to do, but actually internally our behaviors, how we will act. And then we always try to get down to what's the perfectly distilled story? What's our elevator pitch? How do we describe this in a really succinct and powerful way? And then at the very top, you'll see the word purpose. Now, our industry is really down on brand purpose. And I think that's because everyone's talked about purpose as, you know, this is Shell trying to save the world. And we all know that's actually shit. And so the purpose has kind of got muddied. But for us, purpose is simply the reason to exist and the reason to believe. So the reason to exist, this is why we exist in the world, why our business, why our service, why our product has to exist, and why you should believe that's true, why that is demonstrably true. So I'm going to quickly show you, and now we're getting to see a bit of the design in action as well. So this is the brand platform I'm going to take you through. And the reason I'm going to quickly take you through it is because there's some ideas held within the guiding principles, which are absolutely key to the way that we design the brand. But the other thing which I really want to talk about here is the design of a brand is not just about the graphics, it's about the language that we use. And actually the way that we tell stories and the way that we construct those ideas in the language that we use are pivotal to everything else. Graphics alone cannot shape a brand. If you're going to tell the story, you've got to use words. And actually finding those words becomes just as important as finding the right type to write them with. So the first guiding principle that we put in place is that we're pragmatic activists. So that's the belief to keep fighting, the energy to keep moving, the ideas that change minds. A movement needs momentum. And by this, we're saying, look, we are activists. At the very heart of the Flair brand is about creating racial equity. It's about ending inequality and inequity within businesses. It's about promoting racial equity. So that is a movement, and we're trying to keep it moving, but it's not about being activists in this space, or not as you'd think of it as a general activist trying to win the argument. We're pragmatic activists, as in we're trying to win the argument and we've got practical ways in which we can do it. We're not just going to talk about it, we're going to show you how you can do it. And this leads into power the wave. The reason this is so important is because there is momentum. Our job is to find ways to keep that momentum going and keep it building, making change possible with practical answers to the hardest questions. We're using technology to create parity. So the idea of Flair is not that activism isn't part of it, it's at the very core of what they're trying to achieve, but that pragmatism leads to the way that they can keep that momentum moving. And then this big one, knowledge is progress. And actually this became quite, the whole idea of knowledge is progress became quite important in terms of how we talk to the C-suite. And at this point, this is one of the phrases that Brand New actually picked up on as being really strong, and it's one that we use above the line. Where strong words have failed, hard numbers can succeed. who knew data analytics can change the world? But where strong words have failed and hard numbers can succeed speaks directly to the issues of D, E, and I as a nebulous strategic idea that's held as a people strategy within any large organization. Because there's always a lot of rhetoric, there's a lot of promises of trying to do the right thing. And what we're saying is those strong words are valuable and people appreciate them. And as an ally, you need to be speaking them. But actually hard numbers in this case, and using data analytics to show the truth and show where the way forward is actually much more powerful and successful. And when we look at the Flair brand itself, what are they? Well, they want to be the architects of change. They don't need to be the poster boys or girls of change. They're the architects of it. They're building the foundations for making racial equity, a genuine force for good within all organizations and making it possible. And why? Because they harness technology to free us all. The right data can change everything. So these ideas are very much not just sort of the guiding principles which tell you what to do and how we behave. It really gets down to the very fabric of the brand, sort of why that brand matters and why it exists. Our reason to exist is really simple. Remember, I talk about absolute distillation. So we get down to the reason to exist. We're about uncovering the answers that power change. So we are all about using data to really understand what people feel, what they think, how their lived experiences are, what those lived experiences are, sorry. And really trying to use data to show the truth. And this comes down to this reason to believe. The truth is in black and white. This is the sort of information that we will punch out for you, that you can take to the C-suite, you can take to your board meeting, you can take to your shareholder meetings. You know what is true. You know how your organization, you've taken the temperature of your organization, you understand in black and white what racial equity looks like in your organization, and now you know what you need to do. What do you need to prioritize, and how do you need to enact that change? And it shows you how to do that. So this is a really powerful piece of thinking for the organization that we're talking to. You know, we're going to give you the truth. And obviously, truth in black and white, there's got lots of really interesting ideas in there, connotations and language-wise, but it is still fundamentally true. And so that leads us to our brand proposition, the ultimate distillation of the brand. And it's this idea as simple as strength in numbers. Now, we've all heard that phrase before. So it's not that we've made something up which is completely original. But in this context, the idea of strength in numbers is really powerful because it's talking to the activist part of the brand. It actually says we need to come together to create that revolution. It does talk about this power of collective will and collective might. But it also speaks to the truth about data analytics in this context, that data is telling you the truth. And that's where the strength lies. By really understanding the truth, you can really enact change. That's the context of the brand proposition, how we build that proposition. Let's get into brand identity. At fucking last, Nick. So I'm going to look at how we brought this to life. So the identity itself. The identity for Flair is really simple. It's an incredibly clean type mark. It's not too trendy. So it's not really taking from sort of necessary latest design trends as such, definitely not in typography, very simple all caps. The magic is in the F itself. And where we have the crossbar of the F, we've got that little glitch. That little glitch is a step up. It's all about this idea of moving people upwards, of raising that platform. So it's kind of obviously, it's about riffing on the core ideas of what makes the brand tick, what makes it do what it does, and trying to visually explain that in an expressive but simple and clear way. I thought, before I get into the rest of it, you probably want to see some early exploration. And I'm going to show you early exploration Because even though we had this strong brand platform, and even though we had this really strong idea of where the brand should go, who it should speak to, obviously we had all those business ideas about how to reshape the brand and who we're playing with and what our competition looked like, all of that stuff was going on. But we still make loads of fucking mistakes. So let's look at some early exploration. So this is the first, one of the identities that we actually did present. And it's really based on this idea of powering the wave. So we've obviously got that wave shape in there. I love the type on this. It's kind of got that 60s, 70s vibe. I love the A and the R. The arc of the R is particularly attractive. It's just a really lovely font. The problem is, it looks like a fucking hair care product. And even more so when we put it with the orange and the yellows, etc. It just looks like something that Weller would have done. And we had that blindness because we were like all about this idea of showing this powerful wave. We've got the little dot there. It's both an eye. It sort of represents a person. But it doesn't look like any of those things really. As soon as you start to step away from it, you're like, what on earth are you thinking? You've created a 70s logo for some sort of 70s hair care product. And although it's attractive and interesting, it's entirely wrong for the brand. We even went into when we're sort of doing exploration, we start to do sort of quick hits. The brand lives digitally. Primarily, it's a digital asset. So it's got the website and it's got the actual software itself. That's mostly where you're going to see it. So we had a little look at the website as well. I mean, even here, what we've done here is really dialed up. Apart from the hair care logo, we've massively dialed up some of that sort of activist vibe. So what we've done here is sort of we actually looked at loads of posters and placards, etc., which have been sort of utilized across, from the 60s onwards, or actually 50s onwards. And we were just looking at the ways that people have make, do and mend and create these sort of powerful sort of posters and placards for good. We were like, well, that's really interesting. Can we do something which is sort of alluding to that? And actually, when you look at it, you're like, well, yeah, you kind of achieved that, but it's just a bit of a mess. It actually feels way too activist. It's got that weird sort of, healthcare, skincare, hair care vibe as well. The actual way we treated the photography with that sort of lovely, rich orange on yellow duotone is actually quite effective. But you can see that we were way off base, even though we had a really strong idea of what the brand was all about. We did this. This is one of the ones we started playing with. I mean, it's literally come out of the most obvious playbook imaginable. I mean, that's sort of very trendy typography. We've got what I would class as a Gen Z green. It's literally, I've seen so much of this green everywhere. And it kind of looks quite interesting. The eye is quite nice, but actually, if you're trying to represent flair, then actually the F is the important bit. The I isn't. Is it a person? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, ultimately, we really lost our way here. Here's the best bit when we really lost our way. So we've got strength in numbers, and you'll see that little white icon there. That's meant to represent this idea of parity and creating racial equity. So the idea of you've got obviously people when you've got the black on top of white or green on top of white, and then the idea of the arrow, and then it moves to equality. What we've actually done is create an icon which looks a bit like a penis, which is not really where we wanted to go at all. No one actually came to us and went, hey, can you do something really effective and powerful, and can you sneak a penis in there? Of course they didn't. We did that ourselves. It's a fucking total mess. It does look really nice. That green looks really, really lovely with black and white photography, but that literally is about as good as it gets. I'm going to show you, I mean, there's a load of other work went into it, but we actually fell upon this flare logo fairly early doors after we'd sort of gone through a couple of rounds of design. And you can already see, I mean, this is actually pretty much where it needed to be. But for some reason, we decided to put it on this sort of horrible purpley, pinky gradient. And I mean, I think we were like, well, that's kind of got a sort of an acceptable, approachable tech vibe to it. And then we ran it through the type and all of that, and it just looks shit. actually it really looks quite weak. It looked okay when we were sort of playing around with what it might look like on a website, and I particularly like the burger. That's already really interesting. But you know, we were even doing stupid ideas like, hey, why don't we just have a navigation where the navigation's at the bottom? Let's really shake things up. It's like, well, why would you want to? You're not trying to shake things up. You're trying to reach a C-suite who need to enact positive change within their organizations. You're not trying to change the way that people search a website. But fundamentally, there was something in it. And so once we had this identity and we were really interested in where it could go. So we then start to play with design systems. So the design systems that we started looking at, so we were thoroughly interested in gridding. I'm a big fan of Swiss poster design. I love a grid. And as a team, we really started to get into this idea of, well, okay, so how creative and expressive can this be? And you'll see there's a lot of shit in there which absolutely doesn't work. We've got stuff which looks like crosswords. We've got stuff which is just, I mean, one of them, the one with the strength in numbers on the blue, where it looks like it's got some sort of board game going around it. I mean, these are all just us throwing everything out there and just really being playful at this point. What you will notice is there's a lot of stuff in here which we did pull through into the brand itself. So this period of playfulness, this period of having no constraints, is actually thoroughly valuable, because it helps you realize, well, first of all, this doesn't feel like a tech brand in the space that we should be in. It feels way out there at times. And although there's some interesting ideas about, so for example, the one in the middle, the orange one with the grid, where you're seeing those little sort of moments of people's faces and hands, etc. That was kind of based on those kids' toys where you've got a picture and you've got tiles and you kind of move them around until you get the image. And we were kind of interested in where that might be. And there is some quite cool stuff which came out of that. But fundamentally, we really weren't reaching it, because what we'd forgotten is what the brand was actually trying to achieve and who it was trying to achieve it for, and more importantly, who it was trying to reach, who did it need to appeal to. And so that means we're trying to get that balance. We want to feel like a vibrant, interesting, contemporary tech brand, but we can't feel so way out there that the C-suite or the sort of board level audience that we're looking to reach are sort of freaked out by it. They still need to see that we're serious. We need to feel like a serious brand. And although there's lots of really great moments and then this is only a snapshot of all of the work we did, you can see immediately it doesn't feel serious. It kind of feels way too playful. So one of the first problems we wanted to solve was color. I'll just quickly go back. The color is a bit of a mess here. We've got oranges and blues and we've got all sorts of gradients flying around. And we were like, it's all too much. So what we did was we went, look, we know we're going to use photography of real people. And we know that we're going to use photography which shows people of color, obviously. So we really want to have a color palette which is super simple and super easy, a very reduced color palette, which just looks amazing next to dark skin, or at the very least, really helps photography really shine. I will say that this actually caused a bit of controversy on Brand New. We called it, it's called Honest White. Both Daryl and Nee, who are the founders, are black. This is their own joke. And they really like it. It's not meant to offend anyone. Honest White is just a lovely play, just like we have True Ebony. But you'll notice, so Active Blue and Wave Blue, just really simple, really nice colors. Active Blue is the one that we use basically everywhere. We flood the brand with it because it's got that lovely vibrancy. It looks incredible on screen. And although Austin was right, it is tricky to print, there are really nice Pantones that you can use, which get you very, very close. In terms of our photography style, what we also realized, as you saw, we were being very playful and we had lots of abstraction. What we also realized was our audience is not going to relate to that. It still feels too funky, too activist. It feels too edgy. What we need to try to do is pull back in some of that more classic corporate look and feel that you'd expect, especially if you're going into a really large corporate organization. We need to kind of reflect that. So we've just done really subtle things. You'll notice in the bottom left, we've treated those lamps to bring through our aqua so that we've got that lovely active blue sort of note within. And then we've also just we've got a load of Photoshop actions on any image, whether that is own shot or whether that is a stock shot that we've taken. So we've got a high saturation of black over the images, which gives you those really rich tones. We also try not to have too much color in there. We like the color to come from skin, and we really like that to be expressive. But fundamentally, it's a very approachable and I'd say it's sort of quite classic use of photography for sort of corporate environments. By that, I mean, we recognize it's not groundbreaking, but we also recognize that we've got some quite vivid elements to the brand, and we need to be able to pull it back and sort of dial things down, especially for an audience who are going to be significantly older and also sort of are much more used to a very corporate look and feel. Typography, very early doors, we ended up going, do you know what? We need one killer font, just one. And it needs to have lots of lovely variation, which it actually does, but Increment Songs is just super clean. It's all, you know, obviously it's kind of this derivative, sort of Helvetica vibes. It's a bit like Object Sans. It's got all of those kind of classic cues. But much like if you look at the sort of certain logos like for Tom Dixon, etc., in sort of fashion space, actually it's got a timeless quality to it. I think that there's some beautiful moments. Just the T alone is worth its own. We could talk a lot about the T. I think it's particularly sexy within that type. But fundamentally, it's super, super easy. We've got one font, we use it everywhere, and we're unapologetic about it. Obviously, the one thing, if you've got a brand where the single-minded proposition and strapline is strength in numbers, your numbers have to be really fucking cool, because we're basically putting our whole brand is resting on the importance of numbers. So we created our own set. And I know someone actually said on Brand New, it's a bit Channel 4. It is a bit Channel 4, and that's fine. It's not Channel 4. It's kind of got that certain vibe, obviously, but it's incredibly effective within the set of the design system of the brand. It basically has two distinct rules. We've got two block shapes and we put them together. That's it. So there's always this kink. There's always this movement or this lever within any of the number forms. We just use them everywhere. We use them in our advertising. We use them a ton when we're going through the actual software itself. And then we move the same style through for iconography as well. Obviously, we talked about this on Brand New. Yeah, we use patterns because naturally we noticed when you start playing around with those little block movements, you start to get you can see it's got of an 8-bit sort of pattern coming about. And what we really liked, we wanted a pattern which was obviously very visually impactful, but we like this idea of DE&I initiatives are nebulous by their very nature. So there's a lot of static. And really this idea of playing with the static, because we as a brand is all about breaking through the static, became quite interesting. So we thought that actually creating static and sort of looking at how that might be a really nice piece of furniture that we can use, well, it was something that worth exploring. And you know, especially when you utilize it across the different color sets, it's just a really interesting piece of graphics. Actually, we also looked at these sort of glitch moments, so removing parts of the pattern, using them as their own individual glitches. We've got a secondary color palette coming through here, which we actually use on their software itself. But it just meant that we could layer these over photography, or sort of these little moments, just meant that we had another distinctive asset, which was a graphic asset that we could lay across other elements just to give a little bit more of ownable sort of brand graphics into the space. So the kind of components of that bright but simple color palette. You've got that kind of traditional corporate feel to the photography, but it's imbued with that sort of color palette, and it's got a distinctive vibe to it. And then we've got all the patterning and the playfulness of that. Let's look at some of the design activation. So this is their website now. And it's very simple and strong. It's not too trendy. So it's not too difficult for sort of this sort of older C-suite audience to get into, but it still feels like a tech brand. And it feels like a, you know, an interesting, powerful tech brand. It's got lots of really lovely moments. Interestingly enough, it's not where we started. I thought I'd show you this. So the initial designs, when we first started getting into this properly, we loved this idea, like I said, about the kids' toy, where you got the tiles and you move them around to create the shape. We started playing with that as a way of looking at the homepage. It worked really well on desktop, looked really cool on mobile. But it also, do you know what? It also started to feel like it was some sort of fashion brand in some way. I think maybe it was the close-up photography which was doing that, but it didn't quite work, even though I still really love this design. I prefer this design. But we knew that it wouldn't resonate with our audience. It just felt a little bit too far. We dialed things up just a little bit too much. We were thinking about ourselves and what we wanted people to think. And actually, that's the danger, isn't it? You know, we wanted brand new to think it was cool. But actually, we really need our audience to think it's cool, and our audience to think that it's valuable to them. So this, although looks really funky, isn't really right. We do have some funky moments though, just looking at the mobile itself. You've got some really lovely ways. I mean, if you go onto the site, you'll notice there's loads of stats, and the way that those numbers are built means that they really lend themselves to interesting motion graphics. But like I say, there's subtle usage of, you know, the border between colors. We might use the that sort of glitch pattern, that static pattern, and that just adds a lovely layer of interest, but it doesn't overshadow what is otherwise a fairly clean and direct piece of design. And again, like I say, we love numbers, we use them all the fucking time. And even into sort of keeping it really clean and clear. Flare Share is part of their site where they've got loads of articles and sort of really interesting insights. And it's just a really clean, simple way to sort of to access all of that insight information. Again, we did look at, they do a ton of presentations, obviously, and they do a lot of white papers, etc. So utilizing all of our elements here, bringing things nicely together. So we've got lots of strong type, we've got provision for really strong headlines and really pulling out a lot of big text. We've got loads of play, utilizing the large numbers. Just a little subtle design wank thing that I want to talk about here is on the bottom left. This is when we've got a lot of body content. And what we like to do here with Flare is we were like, okay, so the left-hand column will be justified type. And the right-hand column, where we use more expressive or we might pull out quotes, will be left aligned. It means that you've got that lovely strict structure. You've got that lovely feel. You can see that delineation between the columns there. And it just feels really tight and clean, but then it's got that moment of expression on the right-hand side. So this became sort of the theme. Overall, it creates a really lovely effect when you're playing with type. I think that, as another aside, we talk about typographic and we talk about typographers. And I know that really beautiful typography, obviously as a designer, I'm very passionate about it. But I do think if you're really good at typography, you've got to be fucking great at body copy, and you've got to be great at lots of body copy, because it should never be an aside. It should never be an afterthought. That's where all the detail is. Our job is to get people to read that content. So we need to make it attractive and interesting, but also accessible. Into the advertising. I mean, advertising, again, when you're using a font as strong as this, we were like, well, okay, instead of trying to sort of make strength in numbers fit on 2 lines, fuck it, let's do it on 3 lines. Let's really celebrate that color in that space and really celebrate those letter forms. It makes a very, very striking headline, just playing around with where our body copy is and where the font lies. So it's just turning that on its head, utilizing that really lovely number work over the photography. And I know that, you know, that's a classic trope, but again, it really focuses you on the photography itself and that person and that sort of piercing stare that he's got. It's a very powerful image. And 42% of Black employees have resigned due to a lack of diversity. So immediately as an advertising piece, it just gets you thinking. And obviously we've mocked it up on a poster. We actually did do a load of guerrilla poster wear for this. And Austin was right, actually. It is quite tricky to get super exact on the color, but you can get near as dog shit is to swearing with it with the right Pantone, and it looks great. And this one's for Kevin Handy from Brand New. Fucking hoodie, mate. Exactly what you want. Did we make these? Yes, we made them. They're a tech brand. They're all wandering around in them, and quite right too. It's got that lovely sporty vibe to it. And it was important because remembering they started as a football brand. That's where, when they started working on this tech, they thought they were going to help local football communities. They're really, really into it. So we were like, let's make some athleisure for them. And then we went one step further because they obviously have their own football team. And now their football team shirts are made up entirely of the brand, which is particularly cool. And it was one of the nicest parts of the project, is to be able to design a football shirt. And it's really cool because it brings all that patterning into play. You've got that lovely type in play. And Nike were very kind to us and did everything. Don't worry, we are nearly at the end. So after all of this, what are the results? It is a dramatic repositioning of the brand. And you know, the strategic design approach genuinely has helped Flair change how their business works. So they have new client wins, major appointments. They work for Network Rail. They've now started working for the Premier League. They're actually working for a raft of large multinationals and huge clients, actually, all around the country and now all around the world. One of the favorite wins for us is we worked on the partnership with Accenture themselves. So Accenture, who were competition, now work with Flair, putting their software in across their international client roster. And we launched in North America. We had a really successful first round of investment. They opened trading on the NASDAQ. It's been this really lovely moment being able to help a brand which is so important to the way society should work, does such incredible work within the organizations that it works with. It was a real privilege to be able to take that challenge on. And it was a real privilege to be able to move them from this space where they were working with small organizations, where they were sort of making these movements inroads, but not necessarily making the big steps that the brand was potentially able to make. And being able to put them onto that stage and give them that platform and give them that positioning, which has been so effective. So my final thoughts. Design is by nature subjective. So brand strategy is so important because it helps create that objectivity. And if you're doing it right, if you're not just using strategy as a way to rationalize creative, you can actually make a real difference to the way that an organization works. And in this case, we were able to really change the way that Flair looked at the competitive set, and it really changed their outlook and who they could work with and where they're working now. And the other piece I want to say is, look, we practice commercial creativity. And as I've shown you, sometimes your design ego can go a little bit out of control, right? And it's important to remind yourself that you are not designing for you. You are designing for the client, and you are designing for the audience that that client needs to reach. And that's the end. Sorry about all the shit bits.